my fabulous mortal soul. I hope you're having a wonderful day out there. Time to cozy up and enjoy the beautiful day with a good story. And I'm here to tell you about sketches by Mark Twain, new and old. He's a very witty person, and his short stories and poems were first published all together as a group in 1882. Everything here is public domain, the illustrations and the stories free for our viewing. I want to share with you a really cute one. I'm a little friend here. It's going to help us out. It's called The Jumping Frog. All right, let's get cozy. All right, here we go. The Jumping Frog was written about 1865. I just love that Mark Twain's wit is still funny to us even now, and the things he talks about we can recognize. And especially those of us who come from farmlands or like to take walks in nature and in the ravines might find this kind of stuff. Okay, anyways. This story was originally written in English, translated into French. They like their frogs, and then retranslated back to English. um, and Mark Twain's writing by patient, unremunerable toil. Even a criminal is entitled to fair play, and certainly when a man who has done no harm has been unjustly treated, he is privileged to do his best to right himself. My attention has just been called to an article some 3 years old in a French magazine entitled Revue des Deux Mondes, a review of some two worlds, wherein the writer treats les humoristes américains, the humorist Americans. Well, I am one of these humorist American dissected by him, and hence the complaint I am making. This gentleman's article is an able one, as articles go in the French, where there was a tangle up everything to that degree that when you start into a sentence, you never know whether you're going to come out alive or not. What? It is a very good article, and the writer says all manner of kind and complimentary things about me, for which I am sure I thank him with all my heart. But then, why should he go and spoil all his praise by one unlucky experiment? What I refer to is this. He says my jumping frog story is a funny story, but still he can't see why it should ever really convulse anyone with laughter, and straightway proceeds to translate into French in order to prove to his nation that there's nothing so very extravagantly funny about it. Huh. Just there is where my complaint originates. He has not translated it at all. He has simply mixed it all up, and it is no more like the jumping frog when he gets through with it than I am like a meridian of longitude. But my mere assertion is not proof, wherefore I print the French version, that all may see that I do not speak falsely. Furthermore, in order that even the unlettered may know my injury and give me their compassion, I have been at infinite pains and trouble to retranslate the French version back into English, and to tell the truth, I have well nigh worn myself out at it. Having scarcely rested from the work during 5 days and nights, I cannot speak the French language, but I can translate very well, though not fast, I being self-educated. I ask the reader to run his eye over the original English version of The Jumping Frog, and then read the French or my retranslations, and kindly take notice how the Frenchman has riddled the grammar. I think it is the worst I ever saw, and yet the French are called a Polish nation. If I had a boy that put sentences together as they do, I would polish him to some purpose. I do want to just say here as a disclaimer, as a person who speaks many languages, different languages have different patterns of grammar style and the placement of nouns to verbs to other, articles. It's different. So I'm thinking I'm already seeing the confusion here. But also I just want to say, j'aime les Français, les francophones au Canada. I have no issues. I'm just reading from Mark Twain, his American point of view here. Without further introduction, The Jumping Frog, as I originally wrote it, was as follows. After it will be found the French version, and after the latter, my retranslations from the French. So here we're going to see the notorious jumping frog of Calaveras County, pronounced Calaveras. In compliance with the request of a friend of mine who wrote me from the East, I called on good-natured careless old Simon Wheeler, and inquired after my friend's friend, Leonidas W. Smiley, as requested to do, and I hereunto append the result. I have a lurking suspicion that Leonidas W. Smiley is a myth that my friend never knew such a personage, and that he only conjectured that if I asked old Wheeler about him, it would remind him of his infamous Jim Smiley, and he would go to work and bore me to death with some exasperating remnants of him as long as tedious as it should be useless to me. If that was the design of it succeeded, I was bored. I found Simon Wheeler dozing comfortably by the bar-room stove of the dilapidated tavern in the decayed mining camp of Angels, and I noticed that he was fat and bald-headed and had an expression of winning gentlemanness and simplicity upon his tranquil countenance. He roused up and gave me good day. I told him that a friend of mine had commissioned me to make some inquiries about a cherished companion of his boyhood named Leonidas W. Smiley. Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, a young minister of the gospel, who, he had heard, was at one time resident of Angel's Camp. I added that if Mr. Wheeler could tell me anything about this Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, I would feel under many obligations to him. Simon Wheeler backed me into a corner and blockaded me there with his chair, and then sat down and reeled off the monotonous narrative which follows this paragraph. He never smiled. He never frowned. He never changed his voice from the gentle flowing key to which he tuned his initial sentence. He never betrayed the slightest suspicion of enthusiasm, but all through the intermittent narrative there ran a vein of impressive earnestness and sincerity, which showed me plainly that, so far as from his imagining that there was anything ridiculous or funny about his story, he regarded it as a really important matter, and admired its two heroes as men of transcendent genius in finesse. I let him go on in his own way, and never interrupted him once. Reverend Leonidas W. Well, there was a feller here, once by the name of Jim Smiley, in the winter of '49, or maybe it was the spring of '50. I don't recollect exactly. Somehow, though, what makes me think it was one or the other is because I remember the big flume weren't finished when he first come to the camp. So that's like a pile of smoke coming out of a chimney. So that means a campfire to keep you warm. But anyway, he was the curiousest man about always betting on anything that turned up you ever see, if he could get anybody to bet on the other side, and if he couldn't, he'd change sides. Anyway, that suited the other man would suit him anyway, just so's he got a bet. He was satisfied. But still he was lucky, uncommonly lucky. He most always came out winner. He was always ready and lame for a chance. There couldn't be no sultry thing mentioned but that feller offered to bet on it, and take any side you please, as I was just telling you. If there was a horse race, you'd find him flush. You'd find him busted at the end of it. If there was a dog fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a cat fight, he'd bet on it. If there was a chicken fight, he'd bet on it. Why, if there were two birds sitting on a fence, he would bet you which one would fly off first. Or if there was a camp meeting, he wouldn't be there regular to bet on Parson Walker, which he judged to be the best exulter about here, but he was too, and a good man. But if he even see a straddlebug started to go anywhere, he would bet you how long it would take him to get there, to wherever it was going to. And if you took him up, he would follow that straddlebug to Mexico. But what he would find out where he was bound for and how long he was on the road. Lots of the boys here has seen that Smiley and can tell you about him. Why, it never made no difference to him. He bet on anything. The dangdest feller. Parson Walker's wife laid very sick once for a good while, and it seemed as if wasn't going to save her. But one morning he came in and Smiley up and asked him how she was, and he said she was considerably better, thank the Lord for his infinite mercy, and coming on so smart that with the blessing the providence she'd get well again, and Smiley, before he thought, says, "Well, I rest 2.5 she'd own anyway." There sure Smiley had a mare. The boys called her the 15-minute nag. But that was only fun, because, of course, she was faster than that. And he used to win money on that horse. For all she was so slow and always had the asthma or the distemper or the consumption or something of that kind. They they used to give her 200-300 yards start and then pass her underway, but always at the tail end of the race she get excited and desperate like, and come cavorting and straddling up and scattering her legs around limber, and sometimes in the air, and sometimes out to one side among the fences, and kicking up more dust and raising more racket, with her coughing and sneezing and blowing her nose, and always fetch up at the stand just about a neck ahead, as near as you could cipher it down. And he had a little small bull pup. That, too, took him. You'd think he wasn't worth a cent, but to sit around and look ornery and lay for a chance to steal something. But as soon as money was up on him, he was a different dog. His underjaw'd begin to stick out like that forecastle of a steamboat, and his teeth would uncover and shine like the furnaces, and a dog might tackle him and bullyrag him, and bite him, and throw him over his shoulder 2 or 3 times, and Andrew Jackson, which was the name of the pup, Andrew Jackson would never let on but what was satisfied, and hadn't expected nothing else, and the bets begin doubled and doubled on the side all the time, till the money was all up. And then, all of a sudden, that Andrew Jackson, he would grab that other dog just by the jint of his hind leg and freeze it to it. Not chaw, you understand, but only just grip and hang until they'd throwed up the sponge, if it was a year. Smiley always come out winner on that pup, till he harnessed a dog once that didn't have no hind legs, because they'd been sawed off in a circular saw, and when the thing had gone along far enough, and the money was all up, and he come to make a snatch for his pet Holt, he seen a minute how he'd been imposed on, and how the other dog had him in the door, so to speak, and he 'peared surprised. Then he looked sort of discouraged like, and didn't try no more to win the fight, and so he got chucked out bad. He give Smiley a look, as much as to say his heart was broke, and it was his fault for putting up a dog he had no hind legs for him to take off. Couldn't take hold of nothing, which was his main dependence on the fight. And then he limped off a piece and laid down and died. Was a good pup. That there was Andrew Jackson, and would have made a name for himself if he'd lived. For the stuff was in him, and he had genius, I know it, because he had no opportunity to speak of, and it don't stand to reason that a dog could make such a fight as he could under the circumstances if he had no talent. It always made me feel sorry when I think of that last fight of his and the way it turned out. Well, this year's Smiley and red terriers and chicken cocks and tomcats and all them kind of things, till he couldn't rest, and you couldn't fetch nothing for him to bet on but he'd match you. He catched a frog one day and took him home, and said he calculated to educate him, and so he never done nothing for 3 months but set on his backyard and learned that frog to jump. You bet he did learn him, too. He'd give him a little punch behind, and next minute you'd see that frog whirling in the air like a doughnut. See him turn one somerset, or maybe a couple, if he got a good start, and come down flat-footed and all right, like a cat. He got him up so in the matter of catching flies, and kept him in practice so constant, that he'd nail a fly every time he fur as he could see him. Smiley said all the frog wanted was education, and he could do most anything, and I believe him. Why, I've seen him in Daniel Webster's down there on this floor. Daniel Webster was the name of the frog, and sing out, "Flies, Daniel, flies," and quicker'n you could wink, he'd spring straight up and snake a fly off and counter there, and flop down on the floor again, and solid as a gob of mud, and then he'd whoop, then he'd fall to you, scratching the side of his head with his hind foot, and as indifferent as if he'd had no idea he'd been doing any more than any frog might do. You never see a frog so modest and straightforward as he was, for all he wasn't so gifted, and when it come to fair and square jumping on a dead level, he could get over more ground in one straddle than any animal of all his breed you ever see. Jumping on a dead level was his strong suit, you understand, and when it come to that, Smiley would ante up money on him as long as he had a red. Smiley was monstrous proud of his frog, and well he might be, for fellers that had travelled and been everywheres all said he laid over any frog that they ever did see. Well, Smiley kept the beast in a little lattice box, and he used to fetch him downtown sometime and lay for a bet. One day a feller, stranger in the camp, he was, come across him with his box and says, "What might it be that you've got in that box?" And Smiley says, sort of indifferent like, "It might be a parrot or it might be a canary, maybe, but it ain't. It only just a frog." And the feller took it and looked at it careful and turned it round his way and that and says, so 'tis. Well, what's he good for?" Well, Smiley says, easy and careless, "He's good enough for one thing, I should judge. He can outjump any frog in Calvers County." The feller took that box again and took another long particular look and give it back to Smiley and says, very deliberate, "Well," he says, "I don't see no p'ints about the frog that any better'n any other frog." "Maybe you don't," Smiley says. "Maybe you understand frogs, and maybe you don't understand 'em. Maybe you've had experience, and maybe you ain't only an amateur, as it were. Anyways, I've got my opinion, and I'll risk $40 that he can outjump any frog in Calvers County." And the feller studied a minute, and then says, kinder sad like, "Well, I'm only a stranger here, and I ain't got no frog, but if I had a frog, I'd bet you." And then Smiley says, that's all right, if you'll all hold my box a minute, I'll go and get you a frog." And so the feller took the box and put up his 40 along with Smiley's and sat down and wait. So he sat there a good while thinking to himself, and then he got the frog out and prized his mouth open and took a teaspoon and filled him full a quail shot, filled him pretty near up to his chin, and set him on the floor. Smiley, he went up to the swamp and slopped around in the mud for a long time, and finally he catched a frog, fetched him in, and give him to this feller and says, "Now, if you're ready, set him alongside of Daniel, and his forepaws just even with Daniel's, and I'll give the word." And then he says, "A 1, 2, 3, get!" And him and the feller touches up the frogs from behind, and the new frog hopped off lively, but Daniel give a heave and hissed up his shoulders, and so like a non-countryman. But it weren't no use. He couldn't budge. He was planted as solid as his church, and he couldn't no more stir than if it was anchored out. Smiley was a good deal surprised, and he was disgusted too, but he didn't have no idea what were the matter, of course. The feller took the money and started away, and when he was going out that door, he sort of jerked his thumb over his shoulder, so, at Daniel, and says, again, very deliberate, "Well," he says, "I don't see no points about that frog that's better'n any other frog." Smiley stood there scratching his head and looking down at Daniel a long time, and at last he says, "I do wonder what in the nation that frog thrown off for. I wonder if there ain't something the matter with him. He 'pears to look mighty baggy somehow." And he catched Daniel by the nape of the neck and hefted him and says, "Why blame my cats if he don't weigh 5 pounds?" He don't weigh 5 pounds at all. And he turned the frog upside down, and he belched out a double handful of shot. And then he see how it was, and he was the maddest man. He set the frog down and took out after the feller, but he never catched him. And here Simon Wheeler heard of his name called from front yard and got up to see what was wanted. And turning to me as he moved away, he said, Just sit where you are, stranger, and rest easy. I ain't going to be gone a second. But by your leave, I did not think that a continuation of the history of the enterprise vagabond Jim Smiley would be likely to afford me much more information concerning the Reverend Leonidas W. Smiley, and so I started away. At the door I met the sociable Wheeler returning, and he buttonholed me and recommended, Well, this here Smiley had a yaller one-eyed cow and didn't have no tail. Only just a short stump like a banner. And, however, lacking both time and inclination, I did not wait to hear about the afflicted cow, but took my leave. I hope he at least said goodbye. It's a bit rude. Now, let the learned look upon this picture and say if iconoclasm can further go. From the Revue du Monde of July 15th, we're now going to see what was translated into the French by the French reporter. On July 15th of 1872, The Jumping Frog, Le Grenouille qui Saute, from the Revue du Monde, 1872. This is by the guy in France that Mark Twain was offended by. Oh, it's actually in French, so I don't mind if I do, guys. If you do understand both languages, you can tell us in the comments how different or the same it was or how it was changed in your opinion. Okay. La grenouille sauteuse du camp du Calaveras. Il y avait une fois ici un individu connu sous le nom de Jim Smiley. C'était dans l'hiver de 49, peut-être bien prétend de 50. Je ne me rappelais pas exactement. Ce qui me fait croire que c'était l'une ou l'autre, c'est que je me souviens que le grand bief n'est pas achevé lorsqu'il arriva au camp pour la première fois, mais de toute façon il était l'homme le plus fiande du Paris qui se peut voir. Prêt surtout ce qui se présentait quand ils peuvent trouver un adversaire, et quand n'en trouvait pas, ils passaient du côté opposé. Tout ce qui convenait à l'autre lui convenait. Pourvu qu'il eût une pari, Smiley était satisfait. Et il avait une chance inouïe, presque toujours gagnée. Il faut dire qu'il était toujours prêt à s'exposer quand il pouvait mentionner la moindre chose, sans que ce gars-là offrit de parier là-dessus. N'importe quoi que de prendre le côté que l'on voudrait. Comme je vois le décès tout à l'heure. S'il y a fait des courses, vous le trouviez riche ou ruiné à la fin. S'il y avait un combat de chiens, il apportait son jeu. Il l'apportait pour un combat de chats, pour un combat de coq. Parbleu! Si vous aviez vu deux poissons sur un œil, on vous aurait offert de parier lequel environ en coup s'enverrait le premier. Et s'il y avait meeting en camp, il venait parier régulièrement pour le curé Walker, qu'il jurait être le meilleur prédicateur des environs. Il qui était en effet un brave homme. Il aurait rencontré une punée de bois en chemin, qu'il aurait parié sur le temps qu'il lui faudrait pour aller où elle voudrait aller. Et si vous aviez pris un mot, il aurait suivi la punaise jusqu'au Mexique, sans se soucier d'aller si loin, ni du temps qu'il y perdrait. Une fois, la femme du curé Walker fut très malade pendant longtemps. Il semblait qu'on ne la sauverait pas. Mais, un matin, le curé arrive, et Smiley lui demandait comment elle va, et il dit qu'elle est bien mieux grâce à la fière miscandeur, tellement mieux qu'avec la bénédiction de la Providence, elle s'en tirerait. Et voilà que, sans y penser, je me répond, ah bien, je garde 2 et demi qu'elle mourir. Elle, qu'elle mourra tout de même. Oh my goodness, oh mon Dieu. Ce Smiley avait une jument que les gars appelaient le bidon de cartes dures, mais sûrement peu plaisirait. Vous comprenez parce que, bien entendu, elle était plus vite que ça. Et il avait coutume de gagner de l'argent avec cette bête. Ah, quoiqu'elle fît poussive, cordonde, toujours prise, l'asthme, de colique et de consomption, ou de quelque chose d'approchant. Lui donnait 200 à 300 yards de part. Puis on l'a dépassé sans peine, mais jamais à la fin elle ne manque que s'échauffer, de s'exaspérer, et elle arrivait, s'écartant, se défendre, ses jambes grêlées et l'air en l'air devant les obstacles. Quelquefois, le viton et faisait avec cela plus de poussière qu'aucun cheval, plus de bruit surtout avec un éternum et remiflemme. Crac! Arrivait donc toujours première d'une tête, aussi jusqu'on peut le mesurer. Et il avait un petit bulldoge qui, à le voir, ne valait pas un sou. On aurait cru que parier contre lui c'était voler, tant il était ordinaire, mais aussitôt les anges faits, il devenant un autre chien. Sa mâchoire inférieure commençait à ressortir comme une gaillarde d'enfant. Ses dents se découvriraient brillants comme des furets, et un chien pouvait le taquiner, l'exciter, le mordre, le jeter 2 ou 3 fois par-dessus son épaule. André Jackson, c'était le nom du chien. André Jackson prenait cela tranquillement, comme s'il ne se fût jamais attendu à autre chose. Et quand les paris étaient doublés et redoublés contre lui, il fut cesser l'autre chien jusqu'à l'articulation de la jambe de derrière, et il ne la lâche plus. Non pas qu'il le méchant vous concevez, mais il s'y serait tenu pendu jusqu'à ce que jetait l'éponge à l'air. Fallut-il attendre un an. Smiley gagna toujours avec cette bête-là. Malheureusement, ils ont fini par dresser un chien qui n'avait pas les pattes de derrière, parce qu'on les avait sciées. Et quand les choses furent un point que voulait, ils en vinrent à se jeter sur son morceau ferré. Le pauvre chien comprit, et un instant quand c'était manque de lui, et que l'autre le tenait. Vous n'avez jamais vu personne avoir l'air plus pendre et plus découragé. Elle ne fit aucun effort pour gagner le combat et fut rudement secouée, de sortir que, regardant Smiley comme pour lui dire « Mon cœur est brisé. C'est ta faute. Pourquoi m'avoir livré à un chien qui n'a pas de pattes derrière, puisque c'est par là que je le batte. » Il s'en alla en compliquant et se couchant pour mourir. Ah! C'était un bon chien, cet André Jackson, et il se serait fait un nom s'il avait vécu, car il y avait de l'étoffe en lui. Il avait de génie, je le sais. bien que de grandes occasions lui ayant manqué. Mais, mais il est impossible de supposer qu'un chien capable de s'en battre comme lui, certaines circonstances étant données, ait manqué de talent. Je ne me sens triste toutes les fois que je pense à son dernier combattant et au dénouement qu'il a en bien. Ce Smiley nourrissait des terriers à rate et des coqs à combattre, et des chats, et tout sortit des choses, un point qu'il était toujours en mesure de vous tenir tête, et qu'avec sa rage de parier et n'avait plus de repos. Il attrapa une journée une grenouille et l'emporta chez lui, disant qu'il prétendait faire son éducation. Vous me croyez si vous voulez, mais pendant 3 mois, il n'a rien fait que lui apprendre à sauter dans une cour retenir de sa maison. Et je vous réponds qu'il avait réussi. Il lui donne un petit coup par derrière et bop! Et l'instant d'après, vous voyez la grenouille tourner en l'air comme un beignet en dessous de la poêle, faire une culbute, quelquefois deux lorsque elle était bien partie, et retomber sur ses pattes comme un chat. Elle avait dressé dans l'art de gober des mouches et les exercer continuellement, si bien quelques mouches, de plus loin qu'elle appréciait, étaient une mouche perdue. Smiley avait continué de dire que tout que s'y manquait et à une grenouille, c'était l'éducation. Qu'avec l'éducation, elle pouvait faire presque tout, et je le crois. Tenez, je l'ai vu poser Daniel Webster sur ce plancher. Daniel Webster était le nom de la grenouille. Et lui chantait des mouches, Daniel, des mouches. Et, en clic doré, Daniel avait bondi. Et, c'est ici, une mouche ici sur le comptoir. Puis sautait de nouveau par terre, où il restait vraiment à se gratter la tête avec sa patte de derrière, comme s'il n'avait pas la moindre idée, et sa supériorité. Jamais vous n'avez grenouille, vous, dit aussi modeste, aussi naturelle, douce comme elle était. Et quand il s'agissait de sauter purement et simplement sur terre plate, elle faisait plus de chemin en une saute qu'aucune bête de son espèce que vous puissiez connaître. Sauter plate, c'est son fort. Quand il s'agit de cela, Smiley entensait les enjeux sur elle tant qu'il lui restait une rouge liarde. Il faut le reconnaître, Smiley était monstrueusement fier de sa grenouille. Il en avait le droit, car les gens qui avaient voyagé, qui avaient tout vu, disaient qu'on lui ferait un jour de la comparer à une autre, de façon qu'il lui gardait Daniel dans un petit bois à claire-voie, qu'il emportait parfois à la ville pour quelques paris. Un jour, un individu étranger au camp à l'arrêt d'avoir sa boîte et lui dit « Qu'est-ce que c'est, vous avez donc serré là-dedans ?» Smiley dit d'un air indifférent « Cela pourrait être un percus serré, mais ce n'est pas rien de percer, ce n'est qu'une grenouille. » L'individuel le prend, le regarde avec soin, le tourne d'un côté et de l'autre, puis il dit « Tiens, en effet, à quoi est-elle bon? » Mon Dieu, répondait Smiley, toujours un air dégagé. Elle est bonne pour une chose, à mon avis. Elle peut battre en sauter toute la nuit dans Comte de Calaveras. L'individu prend de la boîte, l'examinait de nouveau longuement, et la rend Smiley en descend d'un air délibéré. Ah bien, je veux voir pas que cette grenouille aille rien de mieux qu'aucune autre grenouille. Possible que vous ne le voyez pas, dit Smiley. Possible que vous entendiez une grenouille. Possible que vous ne vous y entendez point. Possible que vous avez de l'expérience. Et possible que vous ne soyez qu'un homme mature. De toute manière, j'ai pari $40 qu'elle en battra en santé n'importe quelle grenouille du comté de Calaveras. L'individu réfléchit une seconde et dit comme attristé. Je ne suis qu'un étranger ici. Je n'ai pas une grenouille, mais si j'en avais une, je tendrais le pari. Fort bien, répondit Smiley. Rien de plus facile. Si vous voulez tenir ma boîte une minute, j'irai vous chercher une grenouille. Voilà donc l'individuel qui garde la boîte, qui met ses $40 sur ceux de Smiley et qui attend. Il attend assez longtemps, réfléchissant sous. Et figurez-vous qu'il prend Daniel lui ouvrait la bouche de force avec une cuillère à thé remplie du menu plombe de chasse, mais l'emplit jusqu'en mention, puis il le posait par terre. Smiley pendant était à barboter dans une mare. Finalement, il attrapait une grenouille, la porte à cet individuel et dit « Maintenant, si vous êtes prêts, mettez là-dessus contre Daniel, avec leurs pattes de devant sur la même ligne, et je donnerai le signal. » Puis il ajoute « 1, 2, 3, sautez !» Lui et l'individu touchent leur grenouille par derrière, poup, poup, et la grenouille neuve se met à sautiller. Mais Daniel soulève lourdement, hausse les épaules ainsi, comme un Français ou une personne qui n'est pas de ma pays. À quoi bon? Et ne pouvoir bouger, il était planté solide comme une enclume. Il n'avançait pas plus qu'il se l'eût mis qu'il ne donne pas une coupe de pouce par-dessus l'épaule. Comme ça, ô pauvre Daniel, en disant son air délibéré. Ah bien, je ne vois pas que cette grenouille ait rien de mieux qu'un autre. Ah! Smiley se gratta longtemps la tête, les yeux fixés sur Daniel, jusqu'à ce qu'enfin il dit je me demande comme diable il se fait que cette bête aille refuser. Est-ce qu'elle aurait quelque chose? On croirait qu'elles ont enflé? Ils empoignaient Daniel par le peu du cou et se soulevait et lui dit le loup me croque. Il ne pèse pas 5 livres. Il ne pèse pas 5 livres. Il retournait à la merveilleux craque du poignet du plume. Quand Smiley reconnut ce qu'ils ont été, il fut comme un fou. Vous le voyez d'ici poser sa grenouille par terre et courir après cet individuel, mais il ne n'arrêtera pas jamais. Translation of the above back from the French into the English. The frog jumping of the county of Calaveras. All right. Well, the next will follow the next reiteration of the French translation of the English back into Mark Twain's retranslation of the French back to English to try to show us how the stories were different. And then he writes in the end, the wolf may bite if Me no way, not 5 pounds. He him reserved the unhappy belch 2 handfuls of shot, et le malheureux, etc. When Smiley recognized how it was that he was like mad, he deposited his frog by the earth and ran after that individual, but he, not him, caught never. We can see here by the literal word-for-word translation of Mark Twain with his French-English dictionary that, of course, through translation to translation, things have lost their flow. But I think, modern days and those of us who study languages, we just aware that we can't do translations literally. People who are professional translators, they get the flow, they get the intention, they have the understanding of colloquial terms and slangs and things that a person using a dictionary will translate exactly word for word, place by place, order by order. And we know that if we switch through the Romance languages, there is a reflection or a switching of places between nouns, pronouns, verbs, adverbs, the articles, and all that business. The order of the words themselves and sentences have patterns, and they flip flop between French and English for sure. I know that, but you can see how rough this translation really is. Um, for Mark Twain trying to prove his point, that he is funny and his original is funny to the English reading it, and I think that French translation made perfect sense to me. But then translating that French back into the English, how it changed. Just by that sentence alone, that's a pretty good, fun look at everything. Even the fun in the translating of itself. But that's Mark Twain trying to to prove he is funny in English, and how he translated their French translation of his English. Well, it comes out really chewed up. And so he finally writes, "Such is the jumping frog to the distorted French eye. I claim that I never put together such an odious mixture of bad grammar and delirium tremens in my life. And what has a poor foreigner like me done to be abused and misrepresented like this by that other correspondent in that other country on the other side of the world? When I say, well, I don't see no point spelled that. Frog, that's any better than any other frog. Is it kind? Is it just for the guy over there in France translating my stuff to try to make it appear that I said, bien, I know, ça, not that. That frog had nothing of better than each frog. I have no heart to write more. I never felt so about anything before." And he wrote this and submitted it to a newspaper in Hartford on March 1875. I just even think the way that he gets offended is funny. I don't know if I think he meant it that way. Because it is called Sketches by Mark Twain. Well, that's the end of The Jumping Frog. I hope you found it as fun and interesting as me. And for those of you who are my French friends out there, and I'm gonna call you out. One of my friends who I've collaborated with in the past, Moo 48, who does do their gaming on the Twitch side and has collaborated here with me on YouTube in the past. You guys can look it up. Earlier this year, back around I think March break or just after April, sometime around there. I hope you appreciate it and I didn't mangle your French too much. But vive les francophones canadiennes, et aussi moi. Une allophone. Je suis une allophone. I'm a multi-language speaker whose first language was neither French nor English. Family born somewhere else in the world, and I'm having fun with all the upsets and perils of translating translations. Well, Msoul, I've got to say, it is a wonderful day out there, and it's time for me to head out to the garden. And so, let's put this book down. Happy reading out there, and shout out as I'm thinking about it, Cow and Illegal Bees. I know you love to read. Your reading nook is going well, and I hope you're enjoying your garden and your new home. Congratulations, you guys. And as for me, Msoul, time for me to put down the boba tea. And me and Froggy here, we're gonna go meander the gardens and enjoy our day. Go get your Fitbit steps, everybody. Don't forget to hydrate. And I'll see you next time. I'm Venus Callida, signing off. See you, bye.